Greetings and blessings, YouTube. This is John the Jansenist. This evening I'm just going to be doing I'm just going to call it an exegesis more than an apologetic, since I don't really tend to believe in the concept of apologetics. And this is going to be in response to a brief little interchange that I had with a user that I know fairly well, but who I'm going to again leave unnamed just so that I can deal with the content of the actual discussion in question and not really dwell upon anything else in the matter. I wish to keep this whole thing civil, and I think that to an extent the conversation deteriorated in something that was less than civil, and this is entirely the result of the severity and the extremity of the subject in question. There are many passages in the Old Testament, and I will provide links in the description to most of the major ones that are the subject of this contention. And to basically sum it all up, these verses hint at atrocities that were performed by the state of Israel in the Old Testament against other peoples at various points. Some of these occur as early as the book of Deuteronomy, and you see them happening again and again. Sometimes these so-called atrocities were committed against other kingdoms, and sometimes they were exacted against people within the state of Israel for breaking with the official established religion. Now, before I go any further, I will simply concede a very obvious fact here, just to premise everything. Israel was a theocracy. In essence, the claim of the government of Israel, and I fully believe it, is that God was directly ruling over this one particular nation. And it is purported that this God is the God of all, not just the God of Israel. Israel is simply the country that was given the privilege of having his full and direct revelation via the scriptures in their ancient oral form. So in keeping with this, it is naturally evident that the state of Israel was given certain prerogatives that went along with being this so-called chosen nation. The question that we have before us is, does Christianity have a moral leg to stand on because of these atrocities that they are allegedly apologizing for? And more to the point, does the state of Israel from that time period have a moral leg to stand on? I could spend a very good deal of time going through all of the accounts of atrocities committed by every single other nation in ancient civilization apart from Christianity. I could, for every one example of an atrocity supposedly committed by the state of Israel, I could name 5 done by other cultures, either in close or further proximity from Israel, that did things that make what they did look like child's play. But that would miss the point. And I think that the point was lost in the initial conversation, in part because we were very limited in what we could say. You have 500 character text comments. It's not really adequate to get your point fully across. I've often stated on my other channel, the Hell's Unicorn channel, that violence, death, and destruction is a human problem. And as a result of this, nobody is exempt from its consequence or from its cause. Even in this current post-Enlightenment day and age, where we like to think that we are more genteel and morally upright, quite the opposite is soon discovered if we look to the right media outlets for what's going on outside of our own comfortable little abodes. You see war, you see strife continuing throughout the world, and depending on where you are, many of these primitive barbaric practices still endure. I could use Africa as an example, with pervasive practices of genital mutilation, particularly female circumcision in its various forms. I could go through certain pockets of civilization still to this day that practice cannibalism. I could point to examples of people even in recent Western European history, such as Aleister Crowley, who have openly stated that child sacrifice might be a good way to get in good standing with Lucifer and the rest of the dark spirits that really are the ones we should be siding with instead of the so-called God of the Old and New Testament. I could point to the massive number of unborn children who have been sacrificed for the convenience of a group of people who either think that the population is too high, or because their own little leisurely lives need not be interrupted with the inconvenience of another human being who needs a good 16 to 18 years of guidance and supervision before being left to their own devices. I could go through in grisly detail how these procedures which make this happen occur. They are very much comparable to the ancient practice of the Baalites and the worshippers of Moloch, who sacrificed their own children to a stone idol. In fact, the method of melting the fetus in its early stages through chemical burns with hot saline solution is not all that far removed from the practice of the Moloch worshippers, who would build a great statue with massive hands. They would heat the statue to the point of becoming red hot, and they would place the baby naked right into the hands of this scalding, scouring, hot statue, and the baby would be burned to death, writhing and screaming. But the onlookers, the parents of these babies, would not hear the screams because there were a plentitude of drums playing to drown it all out. And indeed, one could argue that the enlightened rationalizations that we make for these specific practices are perfectly in line with the loud beating of those ceremonial drums which made the sacrifice to Moloch all the less unpleasant. We could look to the rhetoric of various politicians as they excuse the massive atrocities that governments commit the world over. I'll use the United States government as an example. Let's take a look at Afghanistan and Iraq. Sure, the atrocities are maybe not as grisly or as disgusting as some of the older ones, but they are what they are in a less aggravated way. I think ultimately, though, looking at all of this is not really getting to the actual heart of the matter. The heart of the matter, and the question that I think is too difficult for people to ask, is what God would allow all of this to happen? At least as far as us Christians go, it's an uncomfortable question, but for me, it's not an uncomfortable question at all. I can state point blank why it is that God allowed all of this to happen. Read the first 3 chapters of Genesis. According to the book that is not held in the most favorable of states, depending on who you talk to, this is entirely our fault. You could wage, in a philosophical sense, the claim that via secondary causation, the fact that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that is represented in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, and the law, the single positive law that was given to Adam and also to Eve not to eat of it, made it possible for everything that followed to happen. But it alone did not necessitate it. And again, also, the temptations given by the serpent, aka Lucifer, another creation of the same God, could be viewed as a contributing factor, but it alone did not necessitate it. These things are as a wall built at the end of a road. The builder of the wall makes it possible for somebody to drive their car into it and to get themselves killed in the process. But is the wall builder the one that's actually to blame? Was the purpose of that wall to procure the death of that careless individual? Or was that individual's death completely his own responsibility for not taking care to watch out for that wall when he was driving his vehicle? And put any other analogy that you like in the place of it. At the end of the day, regardless to whether or not we can answer the difficult questions about why things are the way they are, we have to concede that things are the way they are. And so we have to deal with them. The fact that I can say openly that most of these societies that perpetuated all of these things deserve to be destroyed doesn't mean that I support destroying every society on the planet, because everybody knows that atrocities are something that is universally the fault of just about every nation that I can think of offhand. And the ones that are not guilty of ones of late are not guilty because they don't have the means, not because they don't have the intention. The problem is not laying guilt per se, because guilt is everywhere. The problem is, how do we fix this problem? The short answer is, we can't. Not unless we want to fix it. And given the tenor of modern day debate between various people with far more power than you or I might have, it's not going to change. And I would argue right now that if all religion disappeared from the world tomorrow, humanity would just find a more scientific means of justifying the things that they do. I'll use the present day new atheist / secular humanist movement as a prime example of what I'm talking about. If you're watching this video, which you will be because I'm going to be sending you this to you as part of a message, how do you think most of these people vote? These people that claim to be the more enlightened people that have freed themselves from the primitive nature of religion. What politicians do you think they've supported? The Americans in particular. We'll just deal with our own country. You think they voted for Obama? Do you think they voted for McCain? Do you think they voted Democrat or Republican in the various congressional races in their respective locales and states? You and I both know that whichever person they voted for doesn't matter. The system itself is what perpetuates what goes on out there in the world. The secular humanists have not freed themselves from the bonds of hatred and destruction. They've simply found a way to distract themselves from it by saying that God is not good and not worthy of worship, and not even taking the time to consider that, hey, maybe the political system that they live under isn't worthy of their adoration either, but they still give it. It's something to think about, and frankly, more people need to think about it, and I doubt most people will ever. Regardless. Until next time, In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. God be with you all.